friends, and welcome to the first episode of the Clay Taxidermy series. You are beginning a new project, which is super exciting, and you have a lot of freedom with this one. You are creating a three-dimensional animal head, and it can be a fictional or non-fictional animal that you create. I realized after doing a practice of this project myself that figuring out how to do these steps can be quite difficult, and rather than just having you start and trying to figure this out all on your own, I thought it would be helpful to start with a skill building project. So in this episode, I'm going to be teaching you how to create a jackalope. The reason why I picked a jackalope to create with you as our skill building activity is that there are a lot of different features of this animal that would relate to many other animals that you might be considering creating for your final project. So we're going to go through and I'll teach you all of these steps of learning how to create eyelids. We're going to learn how to create fur, how to create cheeks and jowls and noses, ears. There's all kinds of things that you're going to learn while creating this animal. This is also a miniature version of what you're going to be completing for your final project. So it gives you a smaller project, we'll create it in a smaller amount of time, and then you'll have a much longer, extended amount of time to create your final project because it will be larger. So we'll go through and complete all of the first half steps today, and we'll watch just this first video and it'll get you to the point where you've got a face, you'll have your eyes, your nose, your cheeks, and then we'll have a second video following this to finish up this skill building activity together. So let's go ahead and get started. The first step is to take a pound of clay, cut it in half, and for each half pound to make a pinch pot. Next, you're going to trim off the edge so that it's nice and flat when you put them together. You'll do this for both sides, so make sure that you're looking for any high points to remove so that they fit really well together. Then you'll go through and add your score marks with a needle tool going in two different directions, making sure that they are deep enough to help them adhere to the other side. You'll add slip around one edge, and once you've done that, you need to go back through and reapply your score marks so that they are still visible and deep enough to connect with the other side. When you first hold them together, you're looking to see if there are any spots where you need to pull the walls out to make sure that those edges aren't too tucked in when you place them together, because that will make an indent that's really hard to fix later on. So make sure that you're pulling out those edges so that they line up neatly together. Then you're going to go through and try to use your thumb to pull from the side that has more clay into that seam so that it's making a nice level surface. Once you've done that, you can use the flat edge of a wooden blending tool to just scrape that clay across that little dent, trying to fill it and make it nice and even. The wooden blending tool will leave you with some rough edges, so use your thumb to just smooth out those larger bumps before you take your sphere and start rolling it in multiple directions on a very flat and clean surface so that you can start to get rid of any of those finger dents that you might have created while you were working on your pinch pot portion of this sphere. Once you've rolled in multiple directions and your sphere is looking pretty smooth, you're going to spray your hands and use your fingers to just slowly blend out any small blemishes or imperfections. You can also use your thumb to just press down any raised corners that you might notice on your sphere, because you want this to be as smooth as possible before we begin creating the face of your jackalope. And this is what your final sphere should look like once you're done smoothing. Next, you'll add your air hole with your needle tool, first to make sure it doesn't explode in the kiln, and second, to make sure that you can manipulate the clay a little bit easier. You'll tap it on the table so that you end up with a flat surface that looks like this, and that's what will be touching the wall. Next, you're going to use your thumbs and just place them on either side of your sphere to help kind of plan out where your eye sockets will be. This should be about halfway on your sphere, so not too close to the top and not too close to the bottom. You can use the tool with a metal ball at the end to help increase the depth of your eye socket and make it a little bit smoother and rounder. Try your best to make both sides even. Then you can spray your fingers just gently with some water to help you smooth out the outside edges of those eye sockets to make sure there's no lines or edges. At this point, you'll also start shaping the nose. So I turned my finger so that it was horizontal and used my fingers and thumbs to press in, creating a little bit of a snout where the nose will stick out from where the eye sockets are. And this is what your head should look like at this point. So you'll notice that my eye sockets are fairly deep. They're in the middle of my head. My nose is starting to slant out. And you can see that the back of my head is still fairly flat because that's where it will touch the wall. The next step is to create the little cheeks for our jackalope. So I rolled a sphere and then chopped it in half using a wire tool. Here you can see I'm just double checking the size before I start hollowing these out. And to do that, I used just that small ribbon tool. So I just scooped out the centers of those spheres and started scoring and slipping them to prepare them to add on to the face. After adding score marks to the head as well, I added an air hole where each of the cheeks were going to be so that the air that's inside of those hollow cheeks can connect with the air that's in the head cavity. Then I started to blend the top of these cheeks really smoothly into the top of the head. And we want this to be a nice smooth transition, whereas the bottom of the cheeks, we want to maintain that round edge to kind of indicate the mouth. So the top we're going to work really hard, and I used one of those small fondant tools to help me blend and kind of scrape that edge so that it became one cohesive piece with the rest of the face. Remember that we want to leave the bottom edge of the cheeks as a little more distinct of a line to make it appear as though it's the start of their mouth. So we want to have a very solid edge along the bottom of the cheeks and a very smooth transition on the top of the cheeks. Here you can see I'm using a tool to help me shape those cheeks just a little bit more by shaving off any of those prominent corners that I might have had just from blending them in. And I wanted to make sure that they didn't stand out quite so much, so I just continued to slowly shave off any little bumps that I didn't like. Afterwards, I sprayed my hands with just a little bit of water and used my fingers to go back through and to smooth out any of those rough edges that might have occurred from me shaving those cheeks down just a small amount. To create the nose, I just rolled a thin coil and then bent it in half and kind of rounded those edges. I lined it up with my nose and then used just a flat tool to scrape the top of it so that it connected with the bridge of my nose. After some more blending, I sprayed my fingers with water and used them to just smooth out the bridge of the nose a little more. Then I used a couple different tools to really enhance the flat edge of the nose that's underneath that corner where the bridge of the nose ends. So we really want that to look nice and solid and flat. I used a couple different tools to try scraping away any extra little bits and made sure that it was nice and smooth by using some water to blend those crumbs out. To create the jaw, I just pinched a wedge-shaped piece of clay that would fit nicely in between the two cheeks on the top and have a nice rounded loop edge along the bottom. I scraped off the back to help it lay a little bit flatter, and then I applied score marks along my face and my jaw so that it would fit together nicely. I used my fingers to help blend the back of the jaw out really smoothly, but again, we want the top to just be very crisp up against those cheeks to imply that that's where the mouth can open. I used this tool to help increase those lines and used it also to shave off any extra pieces to make that line very distinct. Then again, I sprayed my fingers with a small amount of water and blended it in to make my jaw look nice and smooth. To begin the eyes, I rolled a sphere that was about the size of my thumbnail and cut it in half with a wire tool. I made sure the size fit, and then I applied score marks to both the head and to the eyes themselves. After I applied slip, I made sure to reapply those marks to make sure they adhered well. Then I made sure to apply a lot of pressure to make sure I wasn't trapping any air behind my eyes. You'll do this for both sides, so when you place your second eye, make sure that it's level and that they are at the same angle and one isn't looking the other direction. Then I used a tool to just go around and make sure that that seam was blended in and I didn't have that little crack or crease that was left behind. To make the bottom eyelid, I rolled a very thin coil and wrapped it around the eye, starting at about the halfway point before I broke it off, and I did that on both sides with the same coil to make sure it was an even thickness. You don't need to touch the inside edge where it's contacting the eyeball at all, but to help start blending the outside edge, I used my finger to press that coil down so it was a little bit flatter before I used a tool to help me swipe the clay so that it was essentially joining the head and had a nice smooth edge. Doing this step up against the bridge of the nose can be a little bit tricky, so take advantage of your tools while you're working and use those to scrape away any unnecessary clay that you may have. Then you'll spray your fingers and use the outside edge of your finger to really smooth out those parts of the eyes that are by the bridge of the nose. You'll follow the same steps to make the top eyelids, and I decided to roll this coil a little bit thicker to make it look like these eyelids were coming down a little bit farther. You also have the option of changing the angle of this eyelid to try to show different emotions. I used my fingers to flatten these coils out a little bit first to make sure that I was at a good starting point, and then I used my fingers to just swipe the clay from the back of that eyelid so that it was joining with the head that is behind it. And we want this to look nice and smooth, and we will be applying eyebrows above this space, so it's really just how you want your eyelids to connect to your head. Make sure you do this step very evenly unless you want to give your animals a slightly confused look on their face. Afterwards, make sure to blend that edge out with a little bit of water to make sure it's nice and smooth. You may need to use a tool to remove some of that excess clay in the tear duct of your animal, but again, this choice is totally up to you. But make sure that you go back and smooth out the clay in those tear ducts. The final step I'm going to show you in this episode is how to create the eyebrows. So with this, you have a lot of freedom and you're able to create a lot of expression with these eyebrows. Notice that I rolled the coils and then used one to make sure that the length was even for my next coil. The way that you place these on your head can really make a big difference in the expression that you get. So make sure that if you want it to look a little bit sad, they're angled up. They can also be angled just horizontally, and then you can also give it a little bit of anger and have them face down. Whatever you choose, the top of your eyebrow should be blended out into the head fairly well, and don't forget to blend the middle of your eyebrows into that bridge of your nose as well. I used a tool to help me blend underneath the eyebrow so that I didn't go into my eyelid I worked so hard to create. And once I did that, I went back over it and carved away any excess to make sure that they weren't standing out too much or looked too skinny. And we wanted to just carve that down and then smooth it out with our fingers after getting them wet. Once you reach this stage of creating your jackalope, make sure that you check in with me so that we can look at it together and make sure you're completing these steps accurately before you get too far. So check with me and then you're able to watch the next episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this episode and learn how to create the first steps of our jackalope skill building activity with me. We will be working on finishing up this skill building activity in our second episode, so make sure to stay tuned for that.